joining us this afternoon for our Lunch and Learn. We have esteemed local attorney and longtime CRC member Erwin Bennick to talk with us about the book How to Be an Anti-Racist and a community read that we're doing around that. Just want to remind everyone that this is sponsored by the CRC, Community Relations Committee of the Jewish Federation of Nashville and Middle Tennessee, Jewish Federation and Foundation. I always forget that part, sorry. Erwin, can you tell us a little bit about what drew you to this book or this project in particular to start with?
Sure. About 3 years ago, I was invited by one of my clients to attend an event at the public library. And it was one of their usual events where one of the library staff invite an author to come and speak about a book. And in that case, it was Dr. Ibram Kendi, and he was speaking about his book, which had just come out 3 years ago, called Stamped from the Beginning. Stamped from the Beginning is a very hefty tome. It is approximately 500 pages, and it's an intellectual history of racist thought in America, going from Cotton Mather on the Plymouth Rock through Angela Davis in the 1960s. And he demonstrates through exhaustive research how racist thinking has permeated American thought from the beginning, not only among whites, but also among blacks. And it's broken into historical periods, and my clients were nice enough to get me an autographed copy of the book, which I read over a period of time. And as I was reading it, I thought back to an experience that I had through the temple and some of the congregations along West End corridor approximately 10, 15 years ago, when we read a book called Constantine's Sword. For those of you who are not familiar with it, Constantine's Sword is a history of Christian anti-Semitism. And the plan at that time was that each participating congregation would read the book among its members, and then would gather together for a sharing of perspectives and observations among the congregations. So we did that, and I remember having at least one meeting at West End Presbyterian Church among congregations along West End, and found it to be just a moving experience in many respects. Jewish participants were able to express their horror at the experience that the Jewish people have experienced over the years, and Christian participants were able to recognize things that they may not have recognized in the past. I think everyone found it to be a worthwhile experience. So as I was finishing up Stamped from the Beginning and reflecting upon where we are in race relations in the United States, it struck me that it would be a wonderful thing if we were able to take Dr. Kendi's then book and perhaps replicate that process. So I started talking about it, putting together some thoughts about it, and as things will happen, it never sort of reached fruition. But I kept on trying to push it along. That led me to, maybe that's sort of where the idea came from.
Okay, and then what led to next steps?
Well, that's called a leading question. So as I kept on pushing it along, I was eventually referred by somebody at Vanderbilt Divinity School to a gentleman named David Fleer, who runs the Christian Scholars Conference at David Lipscomb University. Lipscomb University, along with 5 or 6 other Church of Christ universities, sponsors every year a Christian Scholars Conference where they bring together scholars in the Church of Christ universe, along with other individuals to speak about important issues of common concern. Some of those issues we share, some of those issues we don't share. But regardless, they are issues that many of us would find familiar to us. So I got in contact with Mr. Fleer, Dr. Fleer, and it turned out that for the Christian Scholars Conference that was scheduled for 2020, this year, 2 weeks actually, one of the principal speakers was going to be Ibram Kendi. And the other speaker was a nationally renowned climate scientist who's going to talk about climate change. So, and this was last fall, so Dr. Fleer and I talked about the idea of reinvigorating the community read, but this time, instead of focusing on Stant from the beginning, we would focus on Dr. Kendi's most recent book, which is How to Be an Anti-Racist. And the idea would be that participants in the book reads would be able to register for the conference at a reduced rate and participate in any part of the conference they wanted, but in particular would be able to participate in a lunch that was going to be set aside to have with Dr. Kendi, with all the groups who had read the book. And that would not only include book groups that were from Nashville, but also Dr. Fleer was going to be reaching out to Church of Christ communities throughout the country, mostly in the South, who would also be encouraged to read the book and participate in the group read with Dr. Kendi. So as in the way I envisioned it, as we had done 15 years ago with Constantine Sword, we would have different groups that would be able to read the same book, reflect on it in their own unique communities, and then come together and share their observations about their read and have the extra benefit of having the author of the book there to reflect back. So that was the path that David Fleer and I began to pursue last fall, last October.
And then coronavirus hit.
And then coronavirus hit.
So it's my understanding that the actual conference is being postponed to next year.
Correct. So the conference was rescheduled now for June of 2021. Dr. Fleer was able to recommit Dr. Kendi to attend the conference in 2021. He will participate in the conference and all available a lunch on June 11th for those who participate. Yes. And so given the opportunity of having so many people sequestered at home, it struck me that now would be as good a time as any for groups to get together, read the book. They couldn't do it in person, but they can do it through the magic of Zoom. And started talking to groups around Nashville to do that. So we come up with somewhat of a different protocol, a different way of looking at it. And the idea would be to read the book, share the thoughts, and then look forward to 2021 to share it with others and Dr. Kendi.
Great. So what other, outside of the Jewish community, who I know we have several different groups in our own community participating, what other groups locally have you got to agree to do this so far?
So far, NOAA has 2 groups that are pending. There is a group at one of the Universalist churches, Unitarian churches, that is forming. I think there's a group in Bellevue, in Franklin, that is forming. And I've made contact with the YWCA, which has had a standing series called Stand Up Against Racism, and they've expressed interest in forming a group as well. So it is possible that we may have as many as 10 groups in Nashville reading the book somewhat around the same time moving forward.
Great. Do you have particular themes or talking points that you're hoping people will get out of the book? So,
you know, I've read the book, and my perception of the book may be different from others. But as I've read the book, their book seems to have 2 components to it, or 2 themes that run through it. The first, which I find to be most engaging and most challenging, is that through the book, Dr. Kendi, it's somewhat of in his own intellectual history, going back from when he was in high school and at the goading of a friend of his, entered himself into a Martin Luther King oratory competition, which he won, but which he found to be difficult for him in terms of coming to grips with what he was reading and how he felt as a young Black adolescent. And the book is a series of vignettes in his life where he goes through being an adolescent, going to college, graduating from college, attending graduate school, finishing up, meeting his wife, and going through these various stages of his own life, where he realizes that he himself has expressed and is a victim of racist thought. Mm-hmm. And the title of his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, basically is a paradigm for how he views to get beyond that. He doesn't talk about not being racist, as we tend to slip into. He talks about how to be an anti-racist, which is, and I hate to use this word, but is a proactive verb or proactive way of characterizing it, in a way that one can get beyond being racist in your thought and in your action. So there's one portion of the book, and I would say there are probably 10 or so chapters of the book, which I view as being primarily intellectual history, his own self-reflection, and how to get beyond that. And then, you know, we as Jews, we tend to be pretty good at self-reflection. We spend lots of time in self-reflection. So I viewed it in that respect as being a very Jewish text. There are other portions of the book where he talks about policy, politics, and power. And I view those as looking at more around the world around him, how that world reflects racist thinking and racist policies, and how one can get beyond that. I don't view Dr. Kendi's book as being, and it's his answer how to get beyond that. It's his answer how to reflect about your own life and your own experiences and how to get beyond racist thinking and racist acts on your part. He comes with his solution. I don't view that as being my solution, but I view it as being a platform from which one can develop a language to talk about how to be an anti-racist and perhaps a path to how to act in our lives to get beyond being a racist.
Interesting. Do you see parallels in the book to kind of current situations with people going into state capitals and things like that? So underlying the white supremacist movement seems to be both racism and anti-Semitism, and those things are tied together. Do you see reflection? Are there links between racism and anti-Semitism in the book, do you feel like, or those things that will come out in our discussions?
Well, I think there is a portion of the book where Dr. Kendi talks about a concept that is out there called intersectionality. Yes. In which intersectionality is an approach to looking at relationships in society, and it posits that discrimination against or oppression of one group is not necessarily separate and apart from discrimination and oppression against other groups. And so he does talk about that. So in my view, certainly as Jews, we've had our own share of being the victims of discrimination, of oppression. And so I think that there are parallels there. In the larger context, we have a race problem in our country, and I don't think we get beyond the race problem by saying that I'm not a racist. I think we get beyond that by being reflective and saying, well, how has racism infected my way of thinking and my way of interacting with others, and how can I get beyond that? So I mean, one might characterize this as being maybe group therapy. But I do think Dr. Kendi's own journey gives the opportunity for one to sort of think back on their own lives. And I'll just talk about my own experience. I mean, I grew up on the South Shore of Long Island. I think in my high school, there were 1,600 people in my high school. I would say there were probably less than 50 Blacks. In my area, there were communities that were identified as being primarily African American and those that were not. At the time, I recognized the difference, although I also recognized there were communities that were primarily Italian, primarily Polish, primarily Jewish. And I recognize that as being part of how I grew up. So I think it's something that one thinks about, and this book, I think, gives us an opportunity to give some thought to that.
Great. I'd like to let other people chime in now with some questions. So Deborah, what's the best way to do that? Should they raise their hands or just speak?
So let me just say, what I mean. So my thought along in my proposal really was for a group through the CRC to form. Depending upon the size of the group, it could be one group, it could be two groups. It probably shouldn't be more than 10 or 15 people per group, right, because that gets to be very difficult to manage Zoom-wise. Mm-hmm. And then the groups figure out a time to get together to meet. Each group should have a moderator. Each group should have a reporter. The reporter being one who would keep track of the general tone, the general thrust of the discussion, without attributing anything to any particular person, because hopefully the groups will engage in meaningful discussion, and there's no reason to attribute anything to any particular person. What should be discussed are how we've all had our own experiences. The groups could decide how often they want to meet. I initially contemplated 3 meetings. There may be more. If we have more than one group, perhaps the groups can then get together and share their own observations. And then looking forward to 2021, the groups would be invited to participate with Dr. Kendi, and the recorder, who's maintained a copy of his or her notes, could then report back to Dr. Kendi and the larger group what the group talked about. So that was the thought.
So Erwin, just to clarify, so the way we've set it up so far is asking people who are interested to message either you or me, and then the idea is that we will then see, once we have a sense of the full group interest, divide up into, as you said, I think you're right, 10 or 12 at the maximum. Is that still how you want to proceed, or should we be, you were thinking each individual congregation having their own group, or should we do it more as a collective?
Well, I think the temple has a group that's forming. I know there's been some discussion at West End. I don't know what the status of that is. I just think it's just a question of seeing how it plays out.
Okay. So, but I think just for the purpose of this call, the idea is a minimum of 3 sessions, that it would be divided into 3 sessions, each session with a slight different theme to the conversation.
Right, and that's how I envisioned it. When the groups, as people look at the book and get their own flavor of the book, they may have a different notion about it. I know among some of the NOAA groups, they're thinking about breaking it into 4 sessions. Mm-hmm. I just think it depends, it's really self-directed. Everybody's gonna have a different view about it, and I think the groups can identify how they feel most comfortable about proceeding.
And relatedly, one of the questions in the chat from Tina is, what's the timetable? I'm guessing the groups are gonna set their own timetables as well, as long as it's done by next June.
Correct. Okay. Correct. But again, I would urge people to take advantage of our time.
Right, when we don't have anything else to do.
Our time safe at home.
Yeah.
It's a good time to maybe get engaged in something that is thought-provoking. Mm-hmm. And then, as we move from stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4, we're all going to be eager to sort of break out of our hovels. So,
Very true. Are there other questions?
I was going to say, I think we're a small enough group that either if you want to put the questions in the chat or if you want to just use your icon, I think we can keep this as an informal conversation if others have questions.
Erwin, do you want to mention to people of the Kendi on the speaking on the 21st?
well, I forgot about that. Why don't you share that, Avi?
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll send it to Deborah. She could share it with the group. He is doing an interview with a Black coalition, and it's a coalition that's primarily interested in race and equity issues, but also poverty issues. And he's doing an hour and a half interview with them about both his first book, Stamped, and this book. And I signed up for it, but I think people might find it interesting to hear his voice.
And
Bobby, is that a local initiative or is that something?
No, it's a national organization that
Right.
I get their information on. I'll send it to you and you could share it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other questions?
Well, although, we're not working now, I would personally be interested more in an October, November, December group or a January, February, March group. So I'm reading it closer to when he speaks.
Okay. We may be able to split into kind of those who want to kick in now and those who want to wait until later. That might make sense.
I have another from the chat. Kitty Calhoun and Susan have been publicizing it at West End. They've been publishing it through the Nashville Jews for Social Justice Space Group. Yeah, so far they're still looking for the interest. And I think that as Stephen just said, I mean, I think if there are people like, for example, I'm reading it now. So for those of us that are ready to read and start a group now, we can have this as an ongoing effort. I think the point is really just to get as many of us as possible to have read it, so that we can be engaged in the conversation with him next year. And also because it raises, I'm about halfway through, and it does raise really interesting questions. It's a very particular way of, it is a slightly different way of viewing some of this that I think is really interesting. And as Leslie mentioned, we are seeing more and more of the racist underpinnings to a lot of the protests that have been going on and other very current events. So the things that we are seeing really in real time relate very, very specifically to some of what he raises in the book.
Erwin, one other thought. Given the rise in anti-Semitism and the anti-Asian stuff and there's all kinds of stuff going on. There's so much that we could relate to currently. But I'm thinking if we could get a group or two started and have the experience, that what you learn from the first couple experiences might be instructive to the next groups that emerge. And maybe this thing is a snowball, that you get 2 or 3 groups going and then in a month, more groups will surface. We have time till June. Maybe we can create a movement of reads.
Well, and I appreciate that. I am continuing to sow the seeds around with as many groups as possible. So I think that's a great idea and a great notion.
And I think that worked well. The city did that last year. I forget the name of the book. I think The 11th Hour or something like that so Tennessee was a pivotal state in women getting the right to vote. And this was the 100th anniversary. And so a number of groups around the city read this book all together. And I think it started off small with just the library and then extended out to a number of other organizations. And it really was like a dialogue you heard in multiple places. And it would be nice if we could end up having this be the same.
Erwin, what about the notion of getting a group going with folks like David Plazas and Keel Hunt and that group, because they have such a wide reach, and maybe David would write, or Holly, the religious reporter, she would be a good voice. Maybe then they would be clarions.
Well, I had communicated with David Plazas in the fall. I have not followed up with him, and I have not followed up with Holly Meyer, but I think those are also great suggestions.
So what, oh, I'm sorry, just gonna say that what we can do is, you know, sort of as we get interest in 10s to 12s, we can start them as the interest forms. So I think, Avi, you're right. You know, once we have a group of 12 people willing to start, we start with those 12 and then we keep building from there. And also to share from the chat, thank you, Susan. So it is available through the library, as I mentioned earlier. I downloaded onto Libby the audio version. There are also other, right now, it looks like, I think they're all checked out and they're in the wait list, but you could put yourself onto the wait list for it if you don't want to purchase, but you want to participate.
And I forgot to mention, but there are 2 study guides that are available to direct conversation. One is actually put together by Dr. Kendi's, and the other, I can't remember who the author of it is, but those are available. And I think, Deborah, you have those, I think. So
yeah, so what I'll do is once a group is started, and to say this for Erwin does not intend to facilitate every group. Each group will have its own, will have to designate its own facilitator. And so once we have the group form and the facilitators identified, I'll be happy to share the guides. And the groups can decide if they want to use Dr. Kendi's guide or if they want to come up with other things, but it's a good start. The Dr. Kendi's guide is a good place to start.
Yeah, I mean, if Erwin can start us off in a group, or someone else can facilitate a group, then those facilitators could work with future facilitators.
Yeah.
Lessons learned, what we did right, what we did wrong.
well, it might be a good idea, given Steve's suggestion, to maybe poll the group and see who wants to start reading now and who wants to read at a later date.
Mhm.
And then, you know, take that going forward.
I think that's a good idea. So of those watching today, if you could either in the chat or message Deborah privately, if you know how to do that in the chat, let us know whether you'd rather start now or wait a few months.
And I did get emails from a few others who are not on the call who are interested and ready to start. So my guess is we do have a group that is pretty much ready to get started. And I see from both Mary and from Ricky that they are already reading and ready to go. So I'm pretty sure we have at least one group ready to start, and maybe 2.
All right. So we can be in touch about dates and things for that in the next week or so.
And then I'll offer this too. For those of you who are interested in a different view, Dr. Kendi actually has written a 3rd book, which is a young adult version,
Right.
and a combination of both Stand from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Yeah.
So one might view that as an amuse-bouche, or you know, a somewhat. I think it addresses the same themes. I haven't read it myself, but it gives a somewhat different perspective and is aimed at a somewhat different audience.
Well, it might be that some of our teens would want to read it. Yeah.
Yeah, great minds. Yeah, I think that actually could be a really interesting parallel project to get some of the young adults reading that piece while we're reading this piece, and then maybe some cross-generational conversations could be interesting too. I mean, I just speaking for myself, I think that different generations do view this topic differently, and there could be some really interesting cross-generational conversations. I remember, I don't know if any of you all remember those Benetton ads when they first came out, whatever it was, 10 or 15, my gosh, I've lost track of time. It's probably 15 years ago now. And I remember thinking to myself, when my children would send, when they would be taking pictures of groups of their friends, I used to joke they look like Benetton ads. That I think for a lot of those the younger generations, by definition, their social groups look different than for many of us from when we were growing up in, you know, Jewish suburban enclaves. And so I think that there could be some real interesting conversations that could come as a result of that.
Erwin, any thoughts? You read the book. Is there what's the age appropriateness? I know you said he did something for kids. Is it a older high school, any high school, middle school?
What, the
YA.
The regular book.
Reading the book.
the most recent book?
Yeah.
It's characterized as a young adult book. I'm suspecting it's high school adolescent.
Sorry, Erwin, what's the title of that one again?
I think it's just, well,
All right, sorry, I can research it.
You know what, Erwin, what I'd be really excited about is looking at the young audience and our putting together a curriculum too that we could offer teachers who are looking for online curriculum material during this homeschooling stuff. I think there's a lot of teachers that if we gave them a unit and a book, if it was age appropriate, that would welcome something.
It's a good idea.
yeah.
I would like to work on that with you I like to get it out to schools.
All right.
That's a great idea, especially if I don't know how you're finding time for everything, but if you think you can help with that,
It's
that
not
would be
that hard because there's
be-
curriculum out there, there's guides out there. It's just.
Yeah. No, I think that would be, I really am,
Cool.
and I'm getting good feedback in the chat on that concept too. Yeah, I think it's a great idea to sort of facilitate it in two different ways. And it may even be something that through through our Jewish educators that they might be able to help share and encourage, especially as we now move into the summer where regardless, there's not going to be school this summer. It's still a question mark as to what will happen this fall, but for sure through the summer, there won't be school, and sadly for many kids, there won't be camp either. And so there will be some time for some of these other pursuits. Oh, Tina's got it. Oh, thank you, Tina. She's ahead of the game on this. She's already got the young adult book on hold. So maybe Tina also can, as a librarian, could help us with both reading and helping encourage others to read that other title.
Right.
You know, when you look at it, can you kind of give us an idea if you think middle school kids, 8th graders, or if it's really a high school book, can you give us an idea what you think?
Okay, yes, I'd be happy to.
Great.
When I get it, I don't have it yet.
Okay.
It's on hold.
I think the idea of maybe trying to do something with young adults and adolescents is a great idea because, quite frankly, most of the people who are populating the groups that exist right now are on the other end of the spectrum.
Other questions from the group for Erwin?
Just applause. It's a great
Yeah.
thing to get started.
All right, well, we still have a little, if anyone has any other thoughts or ideas that they want to share, we have a little more time on our dedicated Zoom time here. If there's anything else that people want to suggest for other possibilities moving forward, other ways to stay connected and engaged during this time.
Well, you know, if this is successful, maybe as a CRC project, maybe every other year, we could sponsor a book and have a book read as an ongoing CRC initiative.
That's a great idea.
It is a good idea, and this is the second one now. We did the thank you to Kara and to Aaron for chairing us with the Dying of Whiteness book that was a broader, a broader initiative, and this also will eventually be part of a broader initiative. And so I think we can do both. We can both create our own, decide our own books that we may want to read as a community, and also stay engaged with these broader programs that are book reads for the broader community in addition to our community.
The other thing that we've talked about around this is Once people have had a chance to read the book and once things are hopefully open again, is maybe taking a group similar to what the Temple did, I believe last year, down to the Equal Justice Initiative. And we had done one when it first opened in Montgomery. So taking a kind of field trip down there, as well as the community of people who have read this book and have it framed in that particular way. So.
Yes, thank you to Kara stepping off. Thank you for joining us. Also, that was another idea that sort of was in motion. I had a lot of interest from people wanting to plan another trip down to EJI, and then you know, it's sort of that particular plan stopped in its tracks. But I know that there is a lot of interest from people to plan another trip there and to continue engaging in that way once we're able to plan things like that again.
Deborah, this would be a good project after Erwin or others get the first groups going and we have a curriculum to share with JCPA.
Oh, okay.
As a project, because
Right.
hey, let's get one of the JCPA awards.
Why not?
Why not?
Concurrently, and actually, thank you for mentioning JCPA, because concurrent to this read locally, I'm also working regionally with some of the other Southeastern regional CRCs and JCRCs to do a program with a gentleman named Eric Ward, who has, he is actually the director now of a program out west, but he had been with SPLC for a long time. And he has done a lot of work specific to, as Leslie mentioned, both anti-Semitism and racism as the underpinning to the white supremacy movement. That both, and in fact, in his research, he says it's anti-Semitism first and then racism, that actually it's the anti-Semitism that is the strongest foundation to those movements. And so I'm working, hopefully we're going to get something on the books on a regional level to do something related to him and that work concurrent to this book and this work. And yeah, I think, yeah, we're getting good comments on the idea of the trip to the museum. I think that, and actually it's something we, you know, again, it's a little hard. It obviously, as everyone knows, right in this moment, it's a little bit hard to know what time will tell, but it's possible by winter we could plan something like that to take a trip down during the winter. Oh, thank you. So Rabbi Jessica recommends, yeah, thank you. It's, his article is called Skin in the Game. And that's one of his seminal pieces. And it's, I'll be honest, I forward a lot of things on to my husband, most of which gets kind of just a sort of very, you know, cursory nod. That article really stuck out to him. That was the one that he was like, we need to do something with this. This is really interesting. This is really unique. And that was part of the motivation of reaching out and trying to do something regional related to connecting with him specifically. So thank you for the article. Yeah, so just as a reminder, so that the article, it's Eric Ward, and the article is Skin in the Game.
Deb, send it out with the Kendi stuff.
I will. Yeah, I think I could, yeah. I will send all that out. I'm just looking here, one more message. Just, okay. So yeah, so I see some time frames of people and I will jot all of that down. It looks like, I think we will have enough interest to start a group pretty shortly, yeah. And then we'll continue them on an ongoing basis as people are ready to start reading. And especially as the copies of the book become more available, I'll look into the possibility. I'll see if anybody, if we have some, if we can get some more copies out, since there is quite a long hold for it from the library. And yeah, so yes, everyone, please feel free to email me your interest and time frame. I will reach out. Those that did in the chat say that you're ready. We'll sort of start with that group. And as I said, there were several who had emailed me prior to today who just are not on the call. And my guess is we're pretty close to our first, being ready to launch the first group.
Awesome. All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. If there are any last questions for Erwin before we let him get back to his day.
I'm trying to message.
Not a question, but I just wanted to mention that this is a hugely current issue. I mean, it's a current issue everywhere, but in Ohio, because our director, our health director happens to be Jewish, in addition to Ohio being very proactive, initially even under a Republican governor in shutting down the state and keeping the anti-Semitism that is attached to this whole issue has been really hot in Ohio and Columbus in particular. So I'm so glad that there's a book to read. I'm sorry I was late to the call.
It's okay. Thank you for
Tony
joining.
Flyer invited me to Shabbat in Florence, Italy, so I had to go.
Oh, wow.
Well, please
Sounds like a good
enjoy.
reason.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Does it come with a
Thank you.
meal? Does it come with something?
No, but what I learned is that a really good rabbi and a beautiful chazanit can do a 30-minute Kabbalat Shabbat and Mariv service, and it's very meaningful. 30 minutes, 30.
Beautiful.
Wow. They should market that. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Erwin, for leading our discussion today and for bringing this important idea to us and spearheading this whole kind of initiative in our local community. I look forward to reading the book. And thanks also to the Federation for sponsoring this and setting us up to do these weekly Lunch and Learn series. We will be back next week with Senator Deborah, I always mess up his
That's
name.
okay. Yeah, so
Dickinson,
please,
right?
yeah, before everyone jumps off, just as a reminder, our guest next week is Senator Stephen Dickerson. He is a Republican in our state legislature, has been on the forefront of pushing for mail-in voting and other ways to engage more people in the voting process. So he will be our guest for next Friday, the same time, noon next Friday. And then we will be taking off May the 29th. We will take off for Shavuot. We'll return on June 5th, and our guest will be Rabbi Saul Strasberg. He will be sharing about the Jewish text and tradition related to tzedakah, which is both giving and receiving. Tzedakah is a two-way street. It's both giving and receiving, and especially as the economic times get harder and harder, many people are going to be needing help that maybe never needed help before. And that is part of our tradition. That's what we are here for as a community, is to help those as needed, even if it's a new phenomenon. So Senator Dickinson next week, off on the 29th for Shavuot, and then Rabbi Strasberg on the 5th. And then I also, just FYI, I've been in touch with some of the senatorial candidates. Our hope is to have after the primary, to do a forum with the Democratic and Republican nominees. Right now, if anyone has gotten their ballot in the mail, you'll see there's something like 15 Republican primary candidates for that seat. So we're going to wait until after primary. So there's one Republican, one Democrat, and we hope to be hosting that in August.
Great.
And can I make a push now for people to put in for their absentee ballots?
Oh. This will be, we're going to include this in the Observer as well, and thank you. So for anyone who is over 60 without any question, you can get your mail-in ballot. That is already set, no issue. One of the things Senator Dickinson will speak about is a proposal. The state legislator intends to come back on June 1st, and he intends to resubmit his original proposal to expand that during this pandemic, that we expand the ability of people to vote mail-in beyond what is already allowed. And those over 60, those with certain health conditions, there's one that's for religious holiday. The date itself is not a holiday, but my colleague in St. Louis, I guess the way theirs is phrased, it can be for any religious reason, and they're trying to make a case that based on Jewish tradition, no Jews should have to go and vote in person because it's not safe for their health. Wow. And so everybody for religious reasons should be able to access the ballot by mail. The way ours is written, that would be a little trickier, but I'm going to be talking to her too to see how they worked on that. It was local rabbis basically who put pressure to say, we as Jews can't go to the ballot this year. It's just not safe and healthy. So how are, let's find a new way. So I'll learn more about that and share that as well. But
Tina, did you already do yours?
I'm sorry.
No, we're planning to, and I want to I will make a copy of the one that came in the sample ballot for Dick. And because
Does anyone know if you could fill it out online and email it back, or do you have to mail it back?
You have, my understanding, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tina.
I think you mail it. Let me go get it.
You mail the, you have to, you mail.
I think you can email it back. I mean, Tina's went to get it. We did the first one. But I think there was something about faxing it or scanning. There were 3 ways to get it back.
Right.
We put ours in the mail.
Because you have to sign it.
Yes.
Yes, you have to sign.
It says mail, fax, or email
Right.
to.
Right.
Okay.
So first you fill out the request for it, which can go back by mail, fax, or email, and then you get the ballot, which can be mailed back.
Right.
Right.
And it's a one-time ballot. It's a
Right.
one-time, you have to do it for every election.
So, right, so if you do it for this August primary,
they mail it back, you fill out the form, send it in, and then they mail you the ballot.
right.
Correct.
Correct.
And as Tina said, you'll do it for, this one is for the August primary, and then you'll do it again for the actual November election. And Celia, I think, had a question. Celia?
No, we were looking into that. And one of the concerns now that you mentioned that was that, number one is you have to, whenever you do it, you put your whole social security number on there. So if you're doing it online, is that more dangerous? Is it better to mail it? Who knows? And there's also some stipulation that was really, really unclear. I saw in a couple of places that if you would have to go and vote at least one time after you do that, or go and vote. It didn't make sense. What is
Before, the way it had been is, and I think it still is, the first time you vote, you have to vote in person before you can then request mail-in. And the theory was, part of that was, it was making it harder for young people who were away at college to vote. I know my own children ran into that. Now, Congressman Cooper said a very interesting thing on the call last week, which I didn't know, which is that if you are away on a campus, if you go to the ROTC office, you can do mail-in vote. But that's what so in other words, if you've never voted here before, the first time has to be in person. But that's actually a question I'm going to ask. We're going to talk to Senator Dickerson about. But if you've already voted here, there's no issue with the mail. And the other question, someone else, sorry, I just lost somebody else had mentioned something else that we were also going to ask him about. Sorry, I lost my.
We had a problem this winter for the primary because we were away. And we submitted our applications, but they didn't have the ballot ready before we flew out. And therefore, they wouldn't then email it to us or something like that. So we couldn't vote in the primary because we were out of the country, even though we submitted our application. So there is sometimes a delay, and there were problems with timeframes.
That was part of what happened in Wisconsin also, was that people had requested, but they didn't get the actual ballot in time, and then they weren't willing to extend the deadline for mailing it in. So that is also on the list of questions for Senator Dickerson.
I would also be very careful to make sure that when you fill out the application, you use the same name that is on your voter card.
Right. Which is more complete than you usually use.
Correct.
Another question.
Yep.
That maybe we can find out, Deborah. In some places you can track like in Washington State, you can track your votes. I mean, your absentee ballots. I don't believe there is one in Tennessee. And that was one thing that's brought up, the Equity Alliance's information that I sent to some of you that I wasn't aware of. So I wonder if there's a way to have that in Tennessee at all, if that's good or bad. But yeah, we have 2 children who live out in Washington State where they all send their ballots in anyway. And they are able to track it, but I mean, don't know.
By the way, it looks like once you apply for an absentee ballot, they automatically send it out, the application. So we had applied for, as I said, for the primary. We didn't get it. We didn't vote. But in the mail a few weeks ago, we got applications for both the primary in August and the election in November. We got applications for both of us without our even asking. So we seem to be on a mailing list now. So we didn't even have to do anything. The applications came. The only one we could submit at this point was for the primary in August, because there are deadlines and starting dates. So the primary, the apps request could not be submitted until May 8th.
Right, right.
So we submitted them this week. I forgot what the request date is for November, but I've got the stuff sitting here on my counter and I will make sure I get it done in time.
And the election commission here has hired additional people because they've had such a slew of applications coming in
Wow.
To handle the mail-in votes, you
to
mean?
handle the mail-in votes.
So,
Mhm.
and then the other piece of that is that some groups have been encouraging people to actually do the training to be a poll worker, so that we can be sure that there are enough people, so that if it doesn't go to all mail-in, that there are enough poll workers, so that, again, we don't run into the problem of Wisconsin, in which there were only 5 polling sites in the whole city of Milwaukee. And so my daughter actually she's already registered to do the training to be one of those workers. And so I'll share that information if anybody else is interested in doing that.
Great.
And that is something I think in my phone call with Senator Dickinson, he agreed that there will be a need for more, given the age of many of the current poll workers. Many of them may not be willing to
Right.
serve this year. No, I mean, it's very serious. I mean, if anyone who's voted in person in the last little while has seen the age of most of the poll workers, and they are in an age category that does put them at additional risk. So getting some younger poll workers is probably a good idea. All right, well, thank you all. Please feel free to email me with your interest and time frame. I think I jotted down what I could, but don't hesitate to follow up with me. And hopefully we'll get the first group started shortly. And hope you have a wonderful weekend. Shabbat Shalom, and look forward to seeing many of you again next week with Senator Dickerson.
Great. Thank you so
Shabbat
much.
Shalom, everybody.
Thank you.